You are scrolling through your streaming service late at night. The blue light of the screen illuminates your face in the darkness of your living room. Thousands of titles flash before your tired eyes. New releases with stunning visuals and intriguing descriptions. Award winners that critics have praised as groundbreaking and essential viewing. Shows that everyone at work seems to be talking about around the water cooler. Your carefully trained algorithms suggest something fresh, something exciting, something you have never seen before and might absolutely love. And yet, your thumb hovers over the same show you have already watched 10 times before. You know every line. You know every scene. You could recite the dialogue from memory. You could describe the background details that most people never notice. But something pulls you back. Something deeper than boredom. Something more powerful, helikans, than simple habit. Something ancient and wise within you. You click play anyway. If this sounds familiar, you are not alone. Millions of people around the world do the exact same thing every single night. They bypass the endless ocean of new content and return to the same familiar shores, the same characters, the same stories, the same emotional beats they have experienced dozens of times before. They settle into their couches, pull up their blankets, and let the opening credits wash over them like a warm bath. For years, people have dismissed this behavior as laziness, a lack of imagination, an unwillingness to try new things. Family members might tease you about it. Friends might roll their eyes and suggest something different. You might even judge yourself, wondering why you cannot seem to move on and explore new territory. But what if rewatching the same stories is not a flaw at all? What if it is actually a psychological survival mechanism? A way your brain protects itself from the chaos and uncertainty of modern life? What if this behavior that society dismisses is actually a profound form of self-care? This is the hidden science behind why we return to the stories we already know. And it begins with something psychologists call the mere exposure effect. In the 1960s, a researcher named Robert Zion conducted a series of fascinating experiments. He showed participants various stimuli, some more frequently than others. What he discovered was remarkable. The more people are exposed to something, the more they tend to like it. This applies to faces we see, to music we hear, to words we read, and yes, to stories we watch. Your brain is wired to prefer the familiar. This is not a weakness of character. This is not a failure of curiosity. This is biology. This is evolution. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. When you encounter something new, your brain has to work overtime. It must process unfamiliar information, categorize new characters, assess potential threats, and decide how to respond emotionally. This takes energy. This takes mental effort. This requires attention and processing power that your brain carefully monitors and protects. But when you return to something you already know, your brain can relax. The cognitive load drops significantly. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex thinking, planning, and decision-making, gets a well-deserved break. The neural pathways are already established. The processing has already been done. Your brain can coast along familiar roads rather than hacking through new jungle. Think about it this way. When you watch a new show for the first time, your brain is constantly asking questions. Who is this character and what do they want? What are their hidden motivations and secret desires? Is this person trustworthy, or are they hiding something? What is going to happen next, and should I be prepared for something upsetting? Every scene demands analysis. Every conversation requires interpretation. Every moment asks for your attention and your emotional investment. But when you re-watch your favorite show, those exhausting questions disappear entirely and completely. You already know all the answers. You already understand every character and their deepest motivations. You already see the plot twists coming from miles away before they unfold. Your brain can simply relax and enjoy the ride without having to constantly navigate the unknown territory. This is what researchers in cognitive psychology call cognitive ease. And it feels good. It feels really, remarkably, surprisingly, wonderfully good. We live in a world that constantly demands our attention and depletes our mental resources. Notifications ping at all hours. Emails flood in faster than we can respond to them. News alerts remind us of everything going wrong in the world. Social media demands that we form opinions on events happening thousands of miles away. Our minds are overstimulated, overworked, and thoroughly overwhelmed. The average person makes around 35,000 decisions every single day. By the time evening comes, our mental resources are exhausted and depleted. So when you sit down after a long and difficult day and choose to rewatch something familiar instead of starting something new, you are not being lazy. You are not lacking imagination or sophistication. You are giving your exhausted brain exactly what it needs. You are choosing rest over work, comfort over effort, peace over stimulation. And there is profound wisdom in that choice. But there is something even deeper going on here. Something that goes beyond simple brain chemistry and cognitive processing. Have you ever felt genuinely sad when a show ended its final season? Have you ever missed a fictional character as if they were a real person who had moved away to another city? Have you ever found yourself wondering what they might be doing right now, even though you know perfectly well they do not actually exist outside of the episodes you have watched? Have you ever felt a genuine sense of loss and grief when a beloved series concluded its run, as if something meaningful and irreplaceable had been taken from your life? This phenomenon is called parasocial interaction. It describes the one-sided emotional relationships we form with media figures, whether real celebrities or fictional characters. The people we watch become our friends over time, not in a delusional way that replaces actual human contact, not in a way that interferes with real relationships, but in a genuine, meaningful, emotionally significant way that shapes our inner lives. When you rewatch a beloved show, you are not just passively consuming content on a screen. You are visiting friends you care about. You are spending time with people who matter to you. People who feel completely safe and predictable. People who will never judge your flaws, disappoint your expectations, or abandon you when things get difficult. In a world where real human relationships can be complicated, uncertain, and sometimes painful, these fictional companions offer something incredibly precious. They offer unconditional presence. Consider the person who rewatches the same sitcom every night before bed. To an outsider observing this behavior, it might seem strange or even concerning. There are millions of hours of new content available at the touch of a button. Why watch the same familiar episodes over and over and over again? But look closer at this behavior, and the answer becomes beautifully clear. Those characters have become trusted bedtime companions. Their familiar voices create a sense of security that helps the nervous system settle. Their predictable storylines create a feeling of stability in an unstable world. In the quiet and vulnerable hours before sleep, when anxiety often creeps in uninvited, these fictional friends provide a buffer, calm, against the unknown darkness waiting outside. This is not escapism in any negative sense. This is emotional regulation at its finest. This is self-care cleverly disguised as simple entertainment. And this brings us to something psychologists call the anxiety buffer. When life feels chaotic and wildly unpredictable, our natural response is to seek control wherever we can find it. We crave certainty. We need to know what comes next. We want guarantees in a world that offers very few of them. But real life rarely gives us the luxury of knowing what will happen tomorrow, next week, or next year. Stories are fundamentally different. Stories follow patterns we can recognize. Stories have structure we can rely on. Stories begin, build tension, and eventually resolve. When you watch a show you have already seen before, you possess something genuinely valuable. You possess knowledge about the future. You know exactly what happens at minute 22 of episode 7. You know which characters survive and which ones face tragedy. You know who finds love and who faces heartbreak. You know precisely how every conflict eventually resolves. This knowledge creates a powerful feeling of agency, not power over other people, but power over your own emotional experience. In a world that constantly reminds you how little control you actually have over external events, rewatching a familiar story gives you something precious. You are not at the mercy of surprise. You are not vulnerable to disappointment or shock. You know exactly how the ending unfolds, and you chose it anyway. That choice matters. Research has shown that this sense of predictability actually reduces cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone in your body. It also activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your biology responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. Literally, on a measurable physiological level, rewatching familiar content calms your entire nervous system and helps your body heal. This is precisely why people often turn to their comfort shows during times of personal crisis and major upheaval in their lives. When the world feels deeply uncertain and genuinely threatening, when personal struggles mount beyond what seems bearable or manageable, when anxiety threatens to completely overwhelm our capacity to cope with daily existence, we reach for the remote and instinctively select something we have already seen 100 times before. This is not avoidance of reality. This is not weakness. This is survival. This is wisdom born of deep instinct. There is another important layer to this phenomenon that deserves careful and thoughtful attention. It involves something powerful, universal, and profoundly human called nostalgia. This emotion has been studied extensively by psychologists and neuroscientists, and what they have discovered reveals just how important our relationship with familiar content truly is. When you rewatch something you originally loved during a happier or simpler time in your life, your brain does not just process the content on the screen. It simultaneously accesses all the memories associated with that content. The neural pathways fire together in complex patterns, connecting the show to the feelings and circumstances you experienced when you first discovered it. Maybe you first watched your favorite series during college, when life felt absolutely full of exciting possibility. Maybe you watched it with a parent or grandparent who is no longer here to sit beside you. Maybe it reminds you of lazy Sunday afternoons before adult responsibilities completely took over your schedule. When you press play on that familiar title, you are not just watching a show. You are time traveling through your own emotional history. Neuroscientists have carefully studied this phenomenon and found that nostalgia triggers the release of both dopamine and oxytocin in the brain. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation. Oxytocin is often called the bonding hormone because it creates feelings of warmth, connection, and love. These are not minor or trivial neurological effects. These are powerful neurochemical responses that make us feel genuinely good in a deep, lasting, and meaningful way. Studies have found that people who regularly engage with nostalgic content report feeling more optimistic about their futures, They report higher levels of self-esteem and confidence. They report stronger feelings of accountability. Social connection, even when they are physically sitting alone in their living rooms. The past, accessed through the portal of familiar stories, becomes a genuine source of strength for facing the challenges of the present. This is why certain shows develop devoted followings that span multiple generations of viewers. Fans do not just passively watch the content. They build entire communities around their shared love for these stories. They create rituals and traditions. They quote memorable lines to each other like secret passwords. They pass these stories down to their children, hoping the next generation will love them just as much. The show becomes a vessel for memory, meaning, and identity that transcends mere entertainment. Consider a narrative illustration that might feel deeply familiar. A young woman faces a major life transition that feels overwhelming. She has just moved to a completely new city for a promising job opportunity. She knows absolutely no one in this unfamiliar place. Her apartment is small and still filled with unpacked boxes. The streets outside her window are strange and confusing. Every single day brings new challenges, new uncertainties, new moments of painful self-doubt about whether she made the right choice. In the evenings, after long hours of navigating an unfamiliar work environment and pretending to have more confidence than she feels, she returns to her small apartment and turns on a show she has already watched many times before. The familiar opening theme plays. The beloved characters appear on screen, and something in her shoulders visibly softens. Something tight in her chest finally loosens its grip. She is not watching this show because she lacks imagination or curiosity about new content. She is watching because this particular show feels like home when nothing else does. The characters have become her companions in solitude, her friends when she has no local friends. Their problems, though entirely fictional, somehow parallel and illuminate her own real struggles. Their eventual triumphs gently remind her that difficult seasons pass and better days eventually arrive. As weeks turn into months, she begins to find her footing in the new city. She makes actual friends. She learns the streets and discovers favorite coffee shops. She starts to feel genuinely at home in her new life. But she continues to re-watch that same show, now not out of desperation, but out of deep affection and gratitude. It has become woven into her personal story, a thread connecting her present confident self to her past, frightened self, and her hopeful future. Self. This is what comfort viewing actually does for us. It holds space for our emotions when we cannot hold them ourselves. It witnesses our transitions without judgment. It stays constant and reliable when everything else around us changes unpredictably. Some people worry that rewatching the same content repeatedly is somehow psychologically unhealthy. They fear it represents emotional stagnation, reality avoidance, or an inability to grow and change. But the scientific research suggests otherwise. Multiple studies have found that people who regularly engage with familiar media are not escaping their emotions at all. They are actually processing them more effectively. The safety and predictability of a known story creates psychological space for reflection and integration. Because you do not need to pay close attention to the plot you already know, your conscious mind can wander productively. It can process the events of your day in the background. It can work through problems without direct confrontation. It can simply rest and recover. In therapeutic settings, there is an important concept called the holding environment. It describes a psychological space where a person feels safe enough to explore difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Familiar media can serve a remarkably similar function in our everyday lives. The show becomes an emotional container, a protected space where complicated feelings can exist and move through us without completely overwhelming our capacity to cope. This is particularly true and valuable during times of grief, loss, or major life transition. When the world feels too heavy and painful to face directly and completely, a familiar story provides a gentle, patient companion. It does not demand anything from us. It does not require us to be strong or articulate or composed. It simply exists alongside us, offering comfort through steady presence. There is also something deeply meaningful about the simple act of choosing what we watch. When you deliberately decide to rewatch a beloved show instead of exploring new options, you are making a quiet but significant statement about your values. You are saying that this particular story matters to you in a real way. You are honoring the genuine impact it had on your life during a particular season. You are allowing yourself the simple human pleasure of returning to something that previously brought you joy. In a culture that relentlessly pushes novelty as the highest value, that measures human worth primarily by productivity and achievement, that equates personal growth with always seeking something new and different, choosing the familiar is almost an act of gentle rebellion. It is a quiet but firm declaration that not everything valuable needs to be optimized for maximum efficiency, that sometimes good enough is actually perfect, that comfort and familiarity have genuine value completely on their own terms. The great philosopher Albert Camus once wrote about the myth of Sisyphus, the tragic figure from Greek legend condemned by the gods to push an enormous boulder up a steep hill for all eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he finally reached the summit. This punishment was designed to be the most terrible imaginable, an existence of endless, meaningless repetition. And yet, Camus suggested, somewhat surprisingly and provocatively, that we should imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his repetitive task has obvious external meaning or purpose, but because he has made peace with the eternal rhythm of his particular existence and found contentment within it. There is something genuinely Sisyphean about rewatching familiar content over and over again. We know the ending before we begin. We know the boulder will inevitably roll back down the hill. We know the story will conclude exactly as it always has concluded every time before. And yet we return anyway, not because we foolishly expect something different to happen, but because the journey itself has become deeply meaningful to us through repetition. Each rewatch actually reveals new layers we never noticed before, details in the background we missed during previous viewings, subtle nuances in the performances that suddenly seem obvious, lines of dialogue that suddenly resonate because our own lives have changed since we last heard them. The story stays exactly the same in every objective detail, but we ourselves are different. And so, the subjective experience transforms each time. This is the beautiful paradox of comfort viewing. It feels like sameness on the surface, but it is actually a form of growth. It feels like standing completely still, but it is actually emotional movement. The familiar content becomes a mirror, reflecting back to us who we were when we first discovered it, and who we are slowly becoming through time. So the next time you find yourself reaching for that show you have already seen a dozen times, do not judge yourself harshly. Do not apologize to anyone for your choice. Do not dismiss your preference as a waste of precious time. Instead, recognize it for what it truly is. A gift you are giving your tired and overworked mind. A visit with old friends who ask nothing in return except your presence. A moment of genuine peace in a world that offers far too little of it. Rewatching is not about fearfully avoiding the new and unknown and unfamiliar. It is about gratefully honoring what has already touched and shaped you. It is about allowing yourself the profound comfort of the known and familiar. It is about coming home to yourself. In the end, all of us are seeking the same fundamental things in this brief and precious life we have been given: connection with others and with ourselves, understanding of our place in the vast and mysterious world around us, peace in our restless and often troubled minds, meaning in our daily routines and choices. And sometimes we find these precious things not in the new and exciting and unfamiliar, but in the well-worn and beloved and thoroughly familiar. In the stories that have already saved us once during a dark time and stand ready to save us again whenever we need them most. The next episode is about to begin right now. The characters you love are waiting patiently for your return, and there is absolutely nothing at all wrong with pressing play one more time. Thank you for spending this time exploring the hidden psychology behind a behavior that so many of us share, but rarely examine closely or discuss openly. If this exploration resonated with something true in your own experience, consider joining us for more deep dives into the fascinating and mysterious patterns of the human mind. There are so many more psychological mysteries waiting to be understood together, and we would be truly honored to continue exploring them alongside you in future conversations.